Alright, YouTube, we're back here to talk about a little bit of Dragon Quest, something we haven't done in a little while, and I do want to, kind of do some Dragon Quest content on the channel, especially whenever Dragon Quest XII kind of starts the marketing cycle, whenever that game's inevitably going to come out. I am, of course, a fan of the franchise. I just haven't played a lot of them. I played Dragon Quest VIII so many times, and I played Dragon Quest IX, Sentinels of the Starry Sky for DS, but I never finished it, but it was pretty fun. I just never completed it. And obviously, more recently, I played Dragon Quest XI. Which I absolutely love, so I'm, of course, looking forward to the next Dragon Quest game. But what we have today is a quote from the creator of Dragon Quest about the silent protagonist within the series and how it's kind of difficult to do that these days with like the modern kind of realistic graphics that we have. It's a kind of short article, so let's hop right into it. Dragon Quest series creator Yuji Horii participated in a dialogue on the topic of RPGs with Katsura Hashino, the director and producer of Alice's upcoming Metaphor Fantasio, however you say it. In an excerpt recently published by Dinfamanico Gamer, Horii talks about the foundations of Dragon Quest storytelling and mentions the small but unexpected challenge the franchise is facing now that video game graphics have evolved to be more realistic, and it has to do with how the protagonist is depicted. Update: please note that the realism discussed refers to things like graphics switching from 2D to 3D, becoming more detailed and expressive, etc., not a switch from stylized to photorealistic graphics. Yuji Horii, who originally aspired to be a manga artist, turned to video games due to his love of storytelling and fascination with the interactivity offered by computers. From his idea of telling a story that progresses through interactions with bosses, Horii eventually created Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest basically consists of dialogue with townspeople with very little in the way of narration. The story is created within the dialogue, that's what's fun about it, the creator muses. Another foundation of Dragon Quest is its silent protagonist, or as Horii describes it, the symbolic protagonist. The idea behind this was to enable players to become the silent main character. They could imagine the character's reactions freely, allowing them to easily project their own emotions onto the protagonist. However, this approach was partly facilitated by the graphics of the time, as Horii comments jokingly. As game graphics evolve and grow increasingly realistic, if you make a protagonist who just stands there, they will look like an idiot. On the other hand, there is no easy fix for the situation, as Horii notes that having the protagonist explicitly react to events can make it hard for players to relate and connect with them, jeopardizing immersion. That's why the type of protagonist featured in Dragon Quest becomes increasingly difficult to depict as games become more realistic. This will be a challenge in the future too, the creator concludes. So yeah, it's kind of short article, I just want to read it really quickly and then we could talk about it. So, the idea of the silent protagonist getting hard to do, I guess in the modern era with like the graphics that we have now, I understand what he's saying, but I think it's fine for particular games. Games that usually have like a lot of dialogue choices, that's where it works. Something like the Fallout series, for example. I guess people have also mentioned the Persona series of Atlas. Also, I think for me, it works for the Dragon Quest series because that's what I expect from the Dragon Quest games that I've played. It's always been, a silent protagonist. And the thing is, too, like, even if there's not voice acting for the main character in the Dragon Quest series, it's not like they don't talk in universe, right? It's not like they're mute, right? Because, like, even with Dragon Quest XI, whenever, at certain times in the story, whenever you meet a character and you need to, like, get something from them or you're explaining what's happened so far to them, like, they'll pull out the camera a little bit and it'll be, like, circling you as the luminary, the main character is, like, explaining to them what's happened. Like, he's talking to them. We're not hearing it, of course. Also, I think maybe that happens in Dragon Quest VIII. It's been a while since I played through like the story of the game, but I feel like there's maybe moments like that. I could be wrong on that. Also, in Dragon Quest XI, your character does have like voice acting for like grunting and stuff in like battle, or if he gets like knocked down in a cutscene or gets hit in the cutscene, there's like a voice that comes out of the body. He just doesn't actually talk. If we do continue using Dragon Quest XI as an example, it is a bit weird with that game because, spoiler warning if you never played the game, but the child version of you does talk whenever you go back in the past in the story. Like, you interact with your child self, and, like, the kid version of you does have a voice actor and is talking and everything.
Hey, Granddad, can I borrow your ladder?
So it doesn't make a lot of sense unless they would have given, like, a narrative reason as to why you can't talk. Like, they would have said, like, you lost your voice after a certain age. You became a teenager, this tragic event happened in your life, and you just couldn't talk anymore. Like, that would have been fine if they just went that route, but they didn't. As I mentioned previously, we do see the Luminary talk in Dragon Quest XI, we just don't hear it. So we clearly can talk, they just have him not. I would say with Dragon Quest XI specifically, it is hurt a little bit by the silent protagonist, but only because they had the past version of you talking. I wasn't expecting it. Whenever you go travel back to the past and you go see your clearly child self because of the hairstyle, I wasn't expecting him to talk because up to that point you've never talked. And when he started talking, I was like, that's kind of weird. When you go to something like Dragon Quest VIII, they do have like flashback segments. I don't think they go as far back as like a child version of yourself, but they do have flashbacks, but you never see the hero talk in Dragon Quest VIII, so it was never weird because he was always a silent protagonist. All that stuff aside, if we weren't having this conversation of Yuji Horii talking about the silent protagonist, going into something like Dragon Quest XII, I would fully expect the protagonist to be silent, because that's what they've always done. But also, I've seen a series flip from a silent protagonist to a voice protagonist, speaking of the Fallout series, when they went to Fallout 4.
Have you ever had sexual relations with any species considered non-human?
Well, there was this one really ugly girl in college. I mean, I had to get drunk, and it was a dare, and ugh.
To be clear, the voice actors for the protagonist in Fallout 4, both the male and female, weren't bad by any stretch of the imagination. There's other problems with the dialogue system in that game, but it wasn't necessarily well received, right? And that's why you see when you go to something like Fallout 76, which is a bit of a different game, it's an MMO, but you don't have a voice protagonist in that game, and then more recently with Starfield, right? They went back to kind of basics with Bethesda-style games, with, the Fallout series, the Elder Scrolls series, where it's just a voiceless protagonist, and you're picking dialogue options out of a window. I bring that up for a reason because Yuji Horii mentioned how, with the modern graphics that we have now, having a very expressive silent protagonist in a Dragon Quest game can break immersion, but I'd also argue to a certain degree that putting a voice to the character would also break immersion. That's not to say that, across the board having a voice protagonist ruins immersion, but when I play something like Fallout 3, for example, and I'm choosing dialogue options, I'm either reading them out loud or I'm saying them in my head, but I'm saying them in my voice. Whenever I have a character saying them for me, it breaks immersion a bit, right? As much as I love playing, Witcher 3, it's a fantastic game, one of my favorite games of all time, I'm playing as Geralt. I'm not playing as me in the role of a Witcher. I bring all that up because I kind of disagree with Yuji Horii there, where I don't think having like a very expressive silent protagonist ruins immersion, right? I think what they did in Dragon Quest XI was actually kind of perfect, where you had a character who made sounds and would react to situations but never talked. Like, it was perfectly fine. A little more expressive, really, than the hero in Dragon Quest VIII, right? Which I think was fine in that game, too. So I'm fine with what they're doing with the series as of Dragon Quest XI. So if they wanted to have a silent protagonist that reacts to situations when there's a tragic event, they look like sad or upset or pissed off or whatever, or they laugh at something that's funny, like, that's perfectly fine, dude. I'm gonna start wrapping up the video here. Like, me personally, I don't necessarily want or expect a voiced protagonist in Dragon Quest XII or beyond or whatever. But I'm also not against it because in the Dragon Quest games that I've played that have voice acting, like, the voice acting is so damn good. So I imagine they could handle a voice protagonist perfectly fine. And let's also go back to, what Yuji Horii mentioned about, immersion or whatever. I don't feel like the Dragon Quest games are super immersive. Like, I'm immersed in the characters and the story, of course, because I'm interested in what's going on. But it's not like I'm transplanting myself onto, like, the main hero when it comes to, like, Dragon Quest VIII or 11 or something, right? Like, I'm not putting myself in their shoes, like, I'm the one going on the quest. Because whether you have a very expressive silent protagonist or a voice protagonist, I don't think it would break immersion at all for Dragon Quest games, because I don't find them to be that immersive anyways. So at this point, like, how old is the Dragon Quest series? And we've always had a silent protagonist, so it'd be kind of weird. I'm not against change. Again, I think that they could probably do a pretty good voiced protagonist, but it'd be kind of strange. It's a series staple at this point, so why change it? Going back to, like, the discussion of graphics getting better, like, I don't know why that matters, right? Obviously, the Dragon Quest series isn't photorealistic because they talk about it in the article. They're not, like, pushing any boundaries for how, realistic games can look or anything. But I don't know if that matters to, like, whether or not a protagonist is silent or not. Like, I was never once, like, really making a big deal about the silent protagonist in Dragon Quest XI, other than the child version of him talking. I'll pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on a silent protagonist in general in gaming, but I guess specifically with the Dragon Quest series? I did see Genki share this article on Twitter, and a lot of the replies are people that want a voice protagonist, like, going forward. They don't like, I guess, silent protagonists in the modern era, and I guess they want that maybe in Dragon Quest XII or beyond. I personally disagree just because I'm not even, like, a super fan of the Dragon Quest series. I've only played a couple of the games, but that's what I fully expect from a Dragon Quest game, so I don't know why people would want something different. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @Davidvyt. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain or leave it like Cobain.